Hey folks, this practice is going to be focused on the thoracic spine and its movements. Typically we find that our thoracic region doesn't move as well as it possibly could, and that may lead to other areas of the spine overcompensating, and it can increase the likelihood of those other areas of the spine getting pain syndromes and what have you. So we're going to focus this movement practice on optimizing the movement of the thoracic region of the spine. To start with, if you have some kind of a bolster or pillows or a series of blankets that you can roll up or towels, we're going to lie off the edge of those to start with. So set them up in a little bit of a stack so that you've got a good amount of height. A couple of inches off the floor is what we're looking for here. And then we're going to come down and lie down on that bolster or whatever props you've got so that the edge of the support is underneath the space between your shoulder blades, okay? So that you can maybe just touch the shoulders down to the floor, but also if they're floating a little bit off the floor, that's okay as well. And once you get there, taking some nice slow breaths through the nose, and where normally we'd focus on relative 360 breath in all regions of the abdomen, I'm going to get you for the first few minutes here just to breathe a little bit more costally. So try to direct your breath a little bit further up into the chest, but not just forward, also to the sides and back as well. So spend a couple of minutes here doing that. One of the keys to helping the thoracic spine move well is to making sure that the intercostal muscles and the intercostal spaces are also moving well. And this is what we're trying to do here. Take just a couple more of the deeper breaths. And after you've done those couple of breaths, we're going to come on up for a moment. And we're going to do a little pivot of our bolster or our towels or blankets or whatever we've got. And we're going to come onto our side over the top of that prop. Here, we're looking to position the prop almost fully over the rib cage and then have the shoulder over the top edge close to the floor, if we can get it close to the floor, okay? Same deal here. We're focusing more on costal breathing, but this time I'd like you to focus a little bit more on directing that breath into the side. And then when we get to the other side, we'll do the other side, okay? You may find that it helps encourage that breathing if you take your top arm overhead. after you spend a few breaths here, but before we move on to the second side, I'm going to ask you to do a couple of small lateral flexion movements of the thoracic spine. So the shoulder is down at the moment, but I'm going to get you to lift just slightly off the floor and try to create a more neutral alignment of the spine, just so that you're getting that effort of lateral flexion in the T-spine. Do that a couple of times, just a small movement, restoring the spine to a little bit more of a neutral position before lowering back down. If you'd like a little bit more load here, that arm overhead is the perfect addition for that additional load. Two more. And then after you've done those extra two, we're going to switch sides. Just at home, roll over. I'm going to do a little switcheroo of the sides here with the bolster. Come on down on your side over the bolster or the props so that your shoulder is hanging over the edge and it's on the floor or very close to the floor. Let your head rest and start to take some of those nice deep breaths with a little bit more of a focus on breathing into the lateral portion of the ribs here. You could also add in the extra arm overhead as a way to give those tissues on the sides of our bodies a little bit more length. After some nice time here, taking those breaths, we'll add in the lateral flexion of the T-spine up to that neutral position and lowering down. Keep in mind that the idea here is for the lateral flexion to occur in the region of the ribs as opposed to the lumbar spine. In other practices, we focus on lateral flexion of the lumbar region. In this one, we're focusing on lateral flexion a little bit higher. For that extra load in this lift, add in the arm overhead. A couple more just for good luck. Once you're down again, take a moment to remove the bolster or the series of props that you have. Just setting them off to the side for now. And come on down onto your front. Once you're down on your front, bring your arms out to a Y formation, thumbs pointing up. Part of what we want to do here with our thoracic spine mobility is not just improve the way that the joints are moving, but also the way that the tissue that moves the joints, the muscles that move the joints, are also functioning. And one of the muscles that we tend to not realize is underactive quite often is the trapezius muscles. And so this particular movement is focused on getting a little bit more activity from the trapezius muscles. Have the thumbs pointing up. In this Y formation then, hover the hands away from the floor. And we're going to hold it for just a few breaths. And lower. We could also add a little bit of load if you had some blocks or some books or something that you'd like to take hold of. You could also add load here, just keeping the forearms in a position of supination, which basically means that the palms would be pointing in if you didn't have the book or the block, okay? And lift again. Slowly lower. Take another moment before we do it a third time. When you're ready, lift on up. See if you can get a little bit more lift. Pause at the top. And lower. Bend the elbows and tent your fingertips onto the floor. Try to keep the mid portion of your sternum, the mid chest, on the ground as you do this. Press into the fingertips lightly, but the intent for the fingertips is a little bit more to draw them back against the floor without letting them slide. So you're using the friction of the floor to pull back, but the fingers aren't going to run too far. Pull back a little bit, push down a little bit, and then draw your sternum forward on the floor. Thinking about the only mode of locomotion being to pull yourself forward using this traction on the ground. Hold at the top here and take a few deep breaths. And lower. 2 more of those, optional. You could keep the hands down, same thing, or you could hover the hands and maybe draw them back a little bit more. Still trying to keep the mid-sternum on the ground. And doing so will really help to direct the extension through the thoracic spine, which is what we're looking for today. Lower gradually. And the third one could be, again, either one of those 2 variations. Come on up. Keep the lower portion of the sternum on the ground. If you've got your hands floating, see if you can float them a little further off the ground and maybe bring the shoulder blades together a little bit more behind you. Couple of breaths. And then set the hands down, either side of the ribs. Come on up to all fours. Once you're on all fours, choose one hand to leave down and the other hand to take up. Lift it up as high as you can. Push the floor away with the opposite hand. And that floating hand, see if you can get a little higher and a little further back. Before we take it down underneath us, a little tap down on the floor, but we're not going to stay there just yet. Lift up to repeat. See if you can push the floor away a little bit more. See if you can lift the floating arm a little bit more. And thread for the second time. Just a little tap. For the third one, open up. Pause at the top. See if you can squeeze a little bit more range of motion here. Thread through, take it all the way underneath you, then set the shoulder down, and then use the other hand to increase the thoracic rotation. Try to keep the hips relatively level. It's going to be a bit difficult to keep them properly level here, but just try to keep both knees on the ground. Try to keep the hips back behind you instead of moving around to the side of you. And take some nice deep breaths here. Gradually unravel, and we'll go for the second side. Switch the hand that is down, and lift the opposite hand all the way up. Then thread through underneath, just for a little moment to tap down before repeating. Pausing at the top. Seeing if you can get a little bit more range at the top. Second thread, a little tap of the shoulder, one more lift. See if you can reach a little bit further up. Thread it through for the third time. This time keep the shoulder down and use the opposite hand to encourage more thoracic rotation. Try to do that without letting the hips wander to the side. Try to keep the hips back behind you and both knees on the ground. Again, directing your breathing a little bit higher today than you might normally. Gradually unravel. Come back to an all fours position. Either moving the knees back or the hands forward, or a combination of the two of those. Bring your forearms down so that they're parallel. Try to keep the hips over the tops of the knees, and then try to bring the sternum closer towards the floor. Working the arms towards straight, looking forward. The looking forward piece is going to help direct more of this extension into the thoracic region, which is where we're looking for it. Trying to work the sternum towards the floor, and then pulsing slightly out, lowering and drawing out. Lowering and drawing out. The little pulse is designed to help keep it active instead of passive. We don't need to train any passive range today. A couple more. I'm sure this just looks wonderfully glamorous to do this exercise. Try to ignore that piece. After your last one, bringing yourself slowly back up to all fours, and then taking a seat, you could do this up against a wall for a little bit of feedback from the wall if you'd like. But the idea, what we're going to do now, is we're just going to focus on a little bit of flexion and then partial range of circumduction at the thoracic spine here. So think about the pivot point being in between the shoulder blades. If you're up against the wall, you're thinking about feeling the wall from that midpoint in the thoracic spine all the way down. And you want to keep that contact with the wall, that full length from the mid-T-spine all the way down. If you're not up against the wall, think about the fulcrum being the mid-spine, and from there, we're going to create some flexion at the spine. If you're up against the wall, don't let the other portions of the spine move. And then return to more of a neutral position. Repeat. As we do that a third time, we're going to add in a little bit of side-to-side movement as well, a little bit of lateral flexion in this range of flexion. And then release it. Do it again. Try to prevent the rest of the spine from moving. Try to add in a little bit of lateral flexion in this range of flexion at the spine. And try to prevent the other regions, specifically lower regions, from moving. One more of those. Flexion. And then add in a little bit of lateral flexion. Come back to all fours after you've done that. And then pop the knees up for a little bit of down dog. When you're here in down dog, press into the fingertips, maybe even get the heels of the hands light on the floor, and then try to work the sternum towards the toes, but without letting it be restful. So the shoulder girdle here isn't going to be at rest. It's actually going to be quite strong in an effort to contain the work in the shoulder girdle and direct this extension into the spine. Just some small movements here, in and out of that extension position. And then walk on forward. Come on halfway up. Bend the knees. Take a moment here if you need that moment for some equalization of blood pressure. And then come on up to standing. Once you're up, we're just going to integrate that spinal, that thoracic spine range of motion into a regular flow so that you can see perhaps how you can utilize that preparation in more of an integrated practice. When you get to the top, lift the arms up, and as you do, think about drawing the pubis and the sternum a little bit closer together, but then a gentle, small range of extension through the thoracic spine. Drawing the pubis and the lowest ribs towards one another is going to help prevent it from becoming extension of the low back. And there's nothing wrong with extension of the low back, except that's not what we're focusing on in this particular practice. A small amount of thoracic extension before folding forward at the hips As you come halfway back up, seeing if you can hover the hands, maybe even take them out into that Y formation, thumbs pointing up, and that gets the trapezius muscles a little bit more involved. Bringing the hands down and stepping back. One of the other ways that I like to get more activity in the upper back is to actually reverse what we would typically do as a normal flow. So instead of lowering first, I'm actually going to untuck my toes so the tops of the feet are down, and I'm going to really slowly draw the pelvis towards the floor, and then as it gets closer towards the floor, I'm going to think about drawing my shoulder blades together behind me, using my arms against the sides of my body, and then drawing my sternum in between the arms. If I feel this moving through more extension of the lumbar spine, I press my feet down a little bit and I lift my hips up a little bit. Then bend the elbows, tuck the toes, come on down before pushing back up to your down dog. Taking a couple of breaths there, you might decide to do a couple of small pulses here of extension through the thoracic spine. Once you are ready, come on down. You could continue doing a number of extra flows. You could also utilize that theme for other work that you might add on to another flow, focusing a little bit more on movement through the thoracic region, and hopefully that helps to sort of free up a little bit of breathing capacity as well, and get the rest of the spine a little bit more support. When you are ready to come on down, set your bolster up the same way we started, and we're going to set up in exactly the same way, with the shoulders over the top, the edge of the prop in the thoracic region, and the arms out to the sides. And we're just going to take a few minutes here. You might decide to close your eyes, you might also just decide to keep them open. And start moving the air in and out through the nose if it's not already. And this time while we're here, try to let your breathing return to a normal, natural rhythm. So instead of directing your breathing more costally now, just breathe. Try to breathe utilizing your full breathing apparatus, and utilize a normal depth of breath. There's no need to direct it a little bit deeper or anything like that at this point. And just notice how you feel in that area. Not necessarily just in the thoracic region, but in the full breathing apparatus area. Keeping your attention focused on those sensations in the breathing apparatus. If your attention wanders off, just catch it, bring it back, and do a little scan again.
Be diligent with catching your attention when it wanders off. Bring it back. Just taking these few minutes to stay focused on how your torso feels, especially as it relates to breathing. If you'd like to stay longer, please stay longer. Otherwise, gradually getting things moving again. Just a little bit of movement in the legs, the feet, the hands, the arms. And then eventually coming up to a seated position.
Thank you very much for joining this practice with me, and I look forward to seeing you again soon in the next video.